Thank you for coming. So usually I'm at home because I work remotely and I'm alone in front of my computer. And today, look, so I'm a bit nervous, so sorry about that. So let's gonna start talking about lighting. That is what we came for. So my name is Belén Hernández. I work as a principal lighting artist. So I'm gonna just give you a brief introduction about myself. So before I start on video games, I graduated from architecture, and then I decided that I wanted to learn more. That, you know, I remember when I was studying architecture that I was playing Assassin's Creed, and I was thinking, wow, how cool will it be to work on a game like that? And I want to do something like that. So when I finished, I decided that I wanted to learn more about 3D and render in real time. So I studied a master, art for video games. And when I was studying, we started working on a project, and I started doing a bit of everything, and was there when I found that the thing that I was enjoying the most was the lighting part. So I decided to focus my portfolio on that, and that's how I started to work at Ubisoft Sofia. So my first game was The Division 2. Right after that, I moved into Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and what a casualty, right? Something that I dreamed when I was still studying, it became reality, and I had the chance to work on an Assassin's Creed. So I worked for 3 years at Ubisoft. Then I moved to Shapefarm. Shapefarm is a studio based in Japan, and I work as a lighting artist there and do all the responsibilities that I have to cover. I was promoted to principal. And just this month, I started to work on another company called Alpha Channel, and this one is based in Toronto. So yeah, my experience have been jumping from one side of the world to another one. So let's gonna start with lighting. That is the real thing here. So I wanted to talk about how lighting is important and the big impact that it has on games. So lighting can affect gameplay, and by this I mean that there are games that might have a gameplay during the day, and some other gameplay during the nighttime. During the day, you might have some more compact fighting type of gameplay, and during the night, some more stealth and hiding type of gameplay. It's going to be treated in a very, very different way if you're lighting up an exterior, if you are working on an interior, and we'll talk about that more in detail. It's going to have a very, very big impact on the overall mood of the scene, and is going to have a very big impact on the general art direction that the game is going to have. So when we work on lighting, we have 3 pillars as foundation. We need to keep this in mind. When we work on lighting, we work to serve the gameplay. We have to help in the gameplay. We need to guide the player. We cannot leave the player on the dark without knowing where to go. And then we have to work the lighting following all the art direction rules. We need to make sure that our lighting is matching the direction and the style that the art direction is giving us. And all of that within the constraints that the technology is giving to us. We need to make sure that our performance is stable because, you know, lights are expensive and very expensive, so we need to have that in mind all the time when we are working. We have some, depending on if you work with one engine or another, you might have some limitations or other. If you work for PC or for consoles and what type of consoles, you might have some limitations or others. And we work with the tech tools that are provided to us. So with that in mind, we start working on lighting, right? So the first thing is that we need to follow our direction. We need to keep constant to keep consistency through the whole game, and it has to look similar and believable. And we need to follow the color language that the art direction is marking, and the type of props that are going to be used. And I use this example of the division, because in the division we had different factions, and each faction has different characteristics, and they had a different set of lighting props that could be used. They had colors assigned to each faction that couldn't be used for another ones, because it's a color language that you are going to provide to the player through the whole game. And for me personally, at least, and I'm sure that many artists as well, we have a big inspiration from cinematography. I think most of the things that I have learned about lighting through the years have come from paying attention on how this is done in movies, because we have tons of amazing references in there. Day and night cycle. This is something that needs to be defined at the very beginning of the game, because it will mark one way or another to work the lighting. The day and night cycles might have an impact on game. As I mentioned before, it might also impact, it might change the behavior of the NPCs. It might affect visibility and many other things. So when you're working with day and night cycle, you have to keep in mind that there are going to be very specific hours of the day that are going to require more treatment, and that they need to be treated in a different way because they are very hard. Dusk and dawn are always going to be super dark. I think you can see it in the example. During the day, all is good, all is going to be visible, but dawn, dusk, and midnight are the ones that need to be treated in a special way, because you need to make sure that no matter when the player comes in, your location has to be visible. And it has to also look good. So is a lot of work that needs to be thoughtful at the very beginning of the project. I have seen games that decide to go with day-night cycles and then realize that cannot cover that, so they need to jump to fixed time. Exterior and interiors. When we start working on exteriors, we start working, you have your directional light that is going to be your sun or your moon, you have your skylight, and you have the sky atmosphere. That's how it's called in Unreal. I'm going to use a lot of terms from Unreal because it's what I use the most, but there are similar names or similar in other engines. So when you're working on exteriors, you have a general ambient light that is going to fill the whole space. So you will go to specific places when you need it, to place, in this case, for example, in Assassin's Creed, to place some torches at the entrance of a building or some fireplace, just to guide the player to put some extra of attention on those specific places. But the general lighting will be coming from your directional and your skylight. Interiors, on the other way, you need to, like the opposite way, you were lighting up the general ambient on the exterior. In the interior, you have to make sure that it's dark. And why do I say that? Because when you are working on an interior, you need to make sure that your lighting is not being affected by anything else. Like sometimes you may have some leaks that come from the sun or from lights from other rooms, and you need to make sure that when you are lighting a room, you can identify those so you can work according to that. If you cannot avoid them, you can hide them, and those are things that you need to keep in mind when working on interiors. The overall mood. This is what we defined many times with lighting. First of all, you need to know what's the story on your scene. What's the mood? What's the player is going to feel when enter that place? Is it going to feel that it is a danger place? Is it scary? Is it welcoming? what is it? In this example, and in Assassin's Creed, this was an assault. It means that you were coming with all your Viking crew, and you had to fight, and you had to conquer this fortress, right? So the whole lighting was focused on, to be this kind of darkness, but visible because I have compact areas. I have tons of smoke and fire effects, but I also need to focus on, put some emphasis on the places that the player has to go. So when you enter here, you know that right on the left of my picture, there is something, because there's yellow contrasting the blue of the sky, so it's marking the whole path that the player has to follow. That is, you come this way and then you turn to the left to continue with your quest. So what I was mentioning about getting your scene ready when you start working with lighting. In the exterior, you need to make sure that all the elements, you have them under control. Why do I say this? Because it has happened to me many times that when you start working on a location, on a map, somebody else has worked before, and you start modifying things on your lighting, and then you wonder why it's not looking the way it should. And it's because maybe something was changed that is overriding my data, and I don't realize, so I'm not getting the results that I want to. So you need to make sure that your scene is clean, that there are no other things that are overriding your settings, and that you have directional light, skylight, sky atmosphere, post-process, everything that has been used under control, so you can modify them according to the look that you're looking for. And I mentioned as well reflections, but currently, if you are working on Unreal and you have lumen reflections that are dynamic, then you don't have any issue. But, and this happens as well in the interiors, when you are using baked reflections, they might bring some light, or they might modify your lighting somehow. So you need to make sure that your reflections on your scene are updated and that are not getting some old data from previous lighting. And when we work on interiors, I always advise here to make sure that you keep constant communication with the environment team, because there are tons of construction rules that you need to follow in order for the light to work in interiors. For example, if you have geometry on your building, something that is going outside, that is receiving some lighting from the exterior and is coming into the interior, this will bring some leaks of lighting into your building. Sometimes, depends on the team, on how you work, but sometimes you can fix it. But if it isn't a big company like Ubisoft was, you need to request the other department to clean the geometry and to make sure that you have the space between exterior and interior separate, so there is no light bleeding inside. And the same for like there is for GI, and I will explain what GI is later, but for GI you need a buffer space for it to calculate, to make the distinction that this is for the exterior and this is for interior. So if your geometry is very thin, you might end up having the same issue of lighting bleeding in. So before you start working on interiors, once again, make sure that all this is not happening. So these are most of the elements that we use when we want to bring light in our games. You have, as I mentioned, directional, that is going to be your sun and your moon. A spotlight is a cone. Point light is 360 light, then the rectangular, it's rectangular. And the skylight. The skylight is going to bring you the light from the sky, as it says. And we'll see about this later as well. Then GI stands up for global illumination. And global illumination means that when you have a ray and it hits on a surface, it will bounce and it will give you a softer but more light from all over the place, and we'll see an example of that later. The sky atmosphere is connected to the directional light, and it will the directional light will scatter through the sky atmosphere, and it will give you this realistic atmospheric look. And then we have the post-process volume. That the main things that we are going to tweak and work with here is going to be exposure and color correction. My advice is, like, when you start working on lighting at the very beginning, you start setting up your directional light, your skylight, and once those are working, you start balancing your exposure. So, GI and why Lumen was such a big revolution for us, for lighting artists. So, you see, when at the very beginning of the video, I'm gonna play it again. This is how my directional light is coming in, and it's just that. This is just the light. But when I turn on GI, then I have all this light around, filling the space, and making it feel way more realistic. Before, most of the games didn't have dynamic GI. We were baking it, or when we were working with fully dynamic lights, we had to fake it. I remember entering in a room where, you know, you have half destroyed and you have some tree and some leaves coming in, and I had to place a light close to the leaves with green color, just to fake that my sunlight was hitting there and bringing some of that green into my scene. But that was all fake. So when Lumen was introduced, it just made our lives easier. So I will suggest always, if you can, always use it. About the sky. Well, it has happened to me. I have seen that people very often forget about the sky. And you'll see, sky is going to cover a big portion of your screen. So it needs to match quality, the same quality that the rest of the world has. So if you need to work on the clouds, and especially now that we have the volumetric clouds tool, that we can afford that, and that we can have the light affecting the clouds and the sky atmosphere affecting as well. We have way more tools now to make them match in terms of quality to the rest of the world that we are building. And the sky atmosphere is going to have an impact on the skylight. As I mentioned before, depending on how your sky atmosphere looks like, this will be the light that the skylight will bring into your scene. And the directional light is going to be scattered through the sky, and it's going to give you that look, which is very cool. What is very cool about the sky atmosphere that we have now in Unreal is that you can modify that atmosphere, and if the default values are made to look like the Earth atmosphere, then you can go there and tweak the values to make it easily look like an alien planet. My advice, if you are going to modify the atmospheric values in there, is to do it softly, because they have a very big impact on the sky. So you will notice that when you are playing with those parameters, they can go quite off very easily. So it's better to just modify them just a little. And the post-process volume. So before you jump into the post-process volume, you need to make sure that you have a solid foundation. And what I mean with that is that you need to make sure that your lighting is working and that your lighting is good enough. Because if you jump here before that is happening, and then you start modifying many parameters, you will find out that it's very hard to balance what you have as base, as the directional and the skylight. You will you can very easily mess up your values not knowing what is happening. So once you make sure that your directional values are fine, that your skylight is fine, that you have worked with exposure and that is also well balanced, then you can jump and tweak many other things. About the exposure, what I mentioned before is that you need to come very early on the setup to work with the exposure. But before you jump into the exposure, you need to make sure that directional and skylight are well balanced. Because exposure, and this is maybe something quite personal, but for what I have seen or what I have experienced, but you shouldn't use exposure to fix issues of your lighting. Like, oh, my directional light is not bright enough, I'm gonna increase the exposure. No, you should increase your directional light, and then you'll use the exposure just to adjust your lighting, like from when you pass from shadow to bright areas, and how your image is going to be exposed to light. The other things that we can use on the post-process volume are white balance is going to basically affect the temperature and the tint of your resin, and this is very helpful. The film settings will help you to balance a bit the shadows, highlights, and contrast of your resin, and then the color gradient. The color gradient is going, for me, is my best friend. The color gradient will help you to give these final touches to the look of your lighting. Once again, the parameters that you are gonna find here are very sensitive, so it's better to just manipulate it by a bit. And when I say a bit, like if the default value is 1, you change it to 1.02 and you see that it's already affecting a lot. So color grading, it will allow you to give more creative looks to your lighting. It will allow to do some more stylized things and to give a very characteristic look to your game. How do we work the composition of lighting? I'm gonna talk about contrast, about depth, texture, and movement. What I mean by movement is how can I make a scene dynamic so you make it feel like it's alive. So starting with contrast, we have tonal contrast. Basically, so a light has three parameters. It has the hue, that is the color. It has the value, that is how bright this is, and it has saturation, okay? So tonal contrast is using the value. So by keeping what is in front of me very dark and what is behind brighter, I'm creating this illusion of depth on my scene. And in this specific scene, I added fog just to increase that feeling. So if I usually test my lighting this a lot with turning the image to black and white just to see how I can read the scene when it is turned to black and white. Is if your lighting is working and you can read the scene when it's black and white, then your lighting is working. But that's like when you are starting with lighting, this is something that is very helpful. So in this case, this scene you say is the same. I mean, it was just using one light, one blue light. So when it goes to black and white, it's the same. All the information is there already. But then we have the color contrast, and you'll see how what I said about turning it black and white is not working here, because in this case, I'm separating the grounds with, I have this gate that is a warm color, I have the fire coming from the top, and then behind what I have framed is the blue color from the moon, and at the very end, you are seeing those two warm colors that are just being the center of the attention of this scene. So with this one, I'm building depth and contrast by putting opposite colors together, because if I go to black and white, you'll see that the values are not that different. The ones from the towers on the back, yeah, you can see the silhouettes there, but from the gate, they are not that different, but it's working way better when you see that the worm is placed opposite to the blue one that is after the gate. Shadows. This is just to, add a bit of a spice to your scene. I'm gonna use the example of this light over here. Like, if instead of placing that light where it is placed now, I put it on in front, yeah, I will have light up my scene. I will have this lid so the player can see what is going there. But when I place it out behind, I'm looking for two things. One, if the tonal contrast that I was talking before, I can perfectly see the silhouette there. And the second ones are the shadows from the fence that are bringing this texture into my lights, into my scene. And this is making it a bit more interesting than if I just have a flat light in front of me. Now this scene, I really love it. In case, this is by Ognan Zagarev. I will recommend you to follow him. He's really good. This is what I'm talking about, using BFX to give movement and to make your scene dynamic and to make it feel alive. This feels like a painting, but alive. You have the birds flying around, you have the fog marking the depth of your scene, keeping contrast, you have the flag moving. All those elements and the use of effects are gonna help you. I mean, yeah, they're not lighting only, but this will make your scene to look alive. And when you put fog, we play a lot on games with fog and dust on our rooms and God rays and things like that, just to mark things and to make them call the attention for the eye. Okay, so storytelling through light. As I mentioned before, in the division we had different factions and each faction was using different type of props. You need to make sure when you are entering to, this is the same that environment artists. When you enter a room and you start working on the lighting for the room, you need to think, or I like to think, who is the people or living there or using the space for, or what is the life there, right? Like if you hang like a broken lamp or a half hanging one because the cable just broke, then you are telling something. You are also giving this feeling of the time passing by, and you are encouraging the storytelling that the place has. In what I like to do a lot as well, it's and this is why I keep saying that I have to keep constant communication with environment artists. When they build places with a lot of storytelling, they love to do that. I love to come with my lighting to show that story that they are building. In this case, what I did was to place this street lamp on next to a tree, so I don't have, as I mentioned before, I don't have a flat light. I have some shadows, and this will make the eye go there and just read a few words, and you can feel there is a riot, there is some anger people, there's police car. So with the lighting, I'm elevating the storytelling that the environment artist is presenting. In this case, there was some dead bodies, and I don't know why I like to show them. So as I mentioned, in this specific case, this was a hotel that was the most chaotic and crazy faction took over, and they were using these neon tubes. So you can see with the chandelier, you can feel that it was a hotel before, but the new faction took over the place, and they start hanging their neon tubes around. So you were building this story based on how this was used before, that it was a hotel, but now with time passing and this faction coming and taking over the place, with the placement and why they are placed like this, you are just elevating the storytelling of the place. Just one other thing to mention here, because I remember one big issue that we have in this room is that when you work with lighting, you need to make sure that your materials are also working and your albedos are compensated. And I'm saying this because in this specific room, we had very, very dark, I don't remember, the floor was dark and the walls bright or the opposite. And when you have something that is very bright and something that is very dark, and it happens the same in real life, they are not gonna take the lighting in the same way. The bright is going to look very bright with a very soft intensity, and the dark will still look dark. So you need to make sure that you don't use extremes and that your albedos are compensated, because if not, you will end up with a super washed out room that you cannot balance the lighting because just the albedos are not okay. And it happens the same with the reflection, that with the roughness of materials, you need to make sure that they are also well balanced, because they will have a big impact on the reflections on your scene. And once again, this is something that we have to keep constant communication with environment team. And this is just to sum up a bit of what I have been talking about before. Like, I'm gonna play a video that I worked recently. Some years ago there was this KDA videos, music videos that I was really into, and there was a specific scene of the beginning of one of the videos that I was super in love with. So I decided to make a fan version of that video. So basically what I did was reduce the scene to the minimum, and you saw already some of the pictures before where I'm showing just silhouettes of what the city is. I'm elevating the contrast. I'm using the fog to increase the depth feeling of the scene. And I'm adding some dynamic elements so I can drive the eye attention where I want it to go. And basically what I'm doing with this video is to use lighting to tell a story. So I don't know if you realize, but when nothing is happening on the scene, then the camera is moving and zooming in and out. But as soon as I have one element that is moving, that is the cut, the camera stops. And as soon as I have that light turning on, that is same than before, is opposite color, and something that is off turns on, your eye immediately goes there. And in case you didn't notice, then I play the cut so that is looking over there, so you say, oh, something happened there. And when I was shaping this presentation, I was watching Fallout. I don't know if you watch it. If you didn't, don't worry, no spoilers. But if you watch it, you will recognize this that is presented at the end of each episode, and they are using the same. And when I saw this, I was like, oh, so cool, such a free example for what I was talking about. So basically, this is so powerful just with the use of lighting, because you have this scene, you don't even know what really is, because you see a man, but you imagine that he's a man. And because you only see it in black. It could be something else, but you're building a whole story on your mind with the information that you get from outside. And the moment here the light changed to green, this is not a spoiler, is what it is about, but you know, the nuclear bomb, and then it turns to orange, so it's simulating the explosion and the fire from the explosion, and then it goes back to sunset. And with such a few elements, is already telling so much. So I just wanted to present it this, so you realize how powerful and the big impact that the lighting can have on your scenes. And just a final note, how everything is black except the sign with the bold boy over there. So just they are only showing you and giving you the information that they want. And okay, and just this is the last thing with this. I'll grab this presentation, but that just a few notes about cinematics, or when you work with cinematics, just a few things to keep in mind. You know that when we work with cinematics, there is a rule that you use three lights. One is going to be your key light. This one is this one that is covering the face and this part of the body. Is always on this in a third. It's never on the front, because it won't show the shapes on a good way. It's always from a side. We'll try. Then you have the fill light, that is this one over here. Without the fill light, the face under the hoodie will be completely black. And then we have a third one, that is the rim light, that is very bright, but it will only cover the side. This is the theory. The reality in games is that most of the times we might not be able to have all of them because of performance budget. But once you know the basics, like you can use 3, or then you can start playing, and then you can start breaking the rules. But the things to keep in mind when you're working with this is that you need to separate the player, or maybe not the player, but the key element of this on the scene from the environment, but in a way that it still belongs there, is still integrated. You need to add lights that match the ones on the environment, because, and this happens a lot, we use a lot of fake lights. Most of the time, 80% of the light that you want, that you see, won't be coming from where you expect it to come from. But you need to make them as much as you can to match what you have on the environment, because you have to make it believable. One of the things that I struggled the most when I jumped from architecture into video games was that the things were not precise, that were not exact. Like I was modeling and I needed precise number, millimeters to build things, until one teacher once told me, you don't need to make it real, you need to make it believable. Sometimes real even feels a bit odd. It's more a matter of make it look good and make it look as you want it to look, and that's why we have artists. And then you need to make the character easy to read. The thing that we try all the time with our lighting is to make everything readable and make it easy to understand for the player, for the spectator, for whoever is going to take your game and get into it. It needs to be easy to understand, and that's why we have lighting for. And then we need to highlight important elements on the scene. So in this one, for example, I wanted to give this type of mysterious look to Eivor. That's why I used the hoodie to shade the light, so it's only highlighting part of the face and the mouth, because it's a tough girl, you know. So I wanted to show that, And then the rim light, I place it over here because I don't know if you have played, but one of the most iconic things on Assassin's Creed is the hidden blade. But in this game, Eivor says, no, why will I hide this? I want my enemies to fear me when I come. So I'll keep it visible. So for Eivor, the hidden blade is in this arm. And with my rim light, I'm highlighting that specific blade. And with this, I wanted to thank you all for coming. And I hope you enjoyed the presentation. And if you have any questions, now is the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. I had a question when you were talking about color gradings, and you use it to have a more creative look. And does it mean a less realistic look? And how do you balance this cursor?
Not necessarily it means less realistic. I have worked most of the time in more realistic games, so I have used it as well to give realistic looks. But basically in color grading, and let's go back there, you have control over the shadows, the midtones, the highlights. You can control the saturation of your scene. Sometimes even the saturation of the scenes by default is very strong, so I try to desaturate it a bit to give it a more realistic look. So it all depends on the style of your game. But when I say that it allows you for more creative looks, what I mean is that, for example, you can go to the shadows, you can warm up your shadows, and it will approach you to that more romantic paintings look. Or you can go to purple. I don't remember exactly what game was, but there was a game that was using purple on all their shadows to give this strong, stylized feeling on the look of the game. So this is a very powerful tool that you can use for many results, but you need to be aware of that, and that when you change it a bit, it might have a big impact on the final look. Any other question?
Thank you for the talk. Did you want to talk a bit about your process for choosing which color for which light, and a tiny bit about color theory?
Okay, so about the color, it all depends on the type of game, what's the mood on your scene. For example, in the division, as I mentioned, the color were defined and associated to the factions of a game. But for example, when I want to build a place that is more welcoming, or is it's a safe place that the player can go there and chill, that nothing is happening, it's going to be fairly bright, it's going to be warm tones. When I want the player to be more on an alarm state, then I start using blinking or flickering lights that will make the player feel more nervous, and they might be more cold tones, or even neon type of. It all depends on the color scheme that your game is following, and trying to match that language.
Hello.
Hello.
I was wondering, how do you approach lighting when it comes to environments that are visually way more colorful and, I would say, powerful than some realistic environments that you showed in your presentation? Like some games like, I don't know, Splatoon, Rocket League, or Oublette.
Yeah, when you have a lot of colors on your scene, you need to be way more careful, because it's very easy to get off with your colors, and the moment you add extra colors, they might crash with the colors from the environment. So in cases when you work with environment that is already very colorful and strong, you might want to keep your lights more neutral and don't play so much with colors. But and when the environment is the other side, like is more balanced and more neutral, then you want to go stronger with the colors on your lights, so you can show, like for example, the exit, and the exit has this green light on top, and you can play with that green light. Or when we use a lot this trick, that is, for example, when you have a door that is closed and you place a red light close to it, or even fill in the room, and the player has to do something to enable that door, and then the light switch. So it depends on trying to match the artistic style that it has. But if you already have a very powerful environment with a lot of colors, you might want to keep your colors on your light down, so you don't crash with that look already. Is there any other question?
Oh, yeah, thanks for the talk. You've got to deal with a lot of constraint, and so do you have a lot of agency to do what you want, or what do you think is the best for the game or the intention?
This happens a lot during producing games. When we work with lighting, well, first we always try to aim for the best that we can, and play as many lights and things as we want. But when we are dealing with a game, we always need to keep in mind that an extra light is going to have an impact on performance. So I work with lights, but always trying to keep them down. And then there is always one step on the process, that is when optimizations kicks in, and then you have to cut your lights. And then what you were aiming, it end up being a little less. So you start cutting your lights as much as you can, as long as it doesn't affect visibility. That's the first rule. Like, you cannot cut lights if then the game is not going to be visible. But there are some times that you need to say bye to some effects or lights that you might like, but you cannot afford. So there is always one step on the process of the development where you have to cut. But you always try to sacrifice the minimum, so it doesn't compromise the quality and the look of the game.
Hello. You work mostly on Unreal Engine. When you place your lights, do you use mostly like spotlights, or do you also use sometimes sphere lights?
About this, if I need shadows, probably I will use a spotlight. If it's to fake GI or to feel just as a feel light without shadows, that is going to be very soft, very contained, then I'll go for point lights, because spotlights with shadows are cheaper. Spotlights are a cone, basically, so the cost is going to be just there. But when you place a point light, and it is casting shadows, it's casting shadows all around. So if possible, use it when you don't need shadows. Sometimes, for example, you have a candle and you have it on top of our table, and if you don't use a point light, it won't work. It will look it would look wrong. So sometimes you have to use a point light. So it also depends on the source. And for example, in Assassin's Creed, it was mostly point lights everywhere. because it was fire. So, and there is other things that we use as well, that when you cannot afford shadows, you might fake it with this a material function or ES texture that basically is like you use a texture that is going to be projected with the light. So it's cheaper than a shadow, than a real shadow. Is a bit more expensive than no shadows at all, but is in the in-between. And it will help you to fake things like, for example, if I have a light inside a cage, it will project this cage shape without the need of using real shadows. But this needs to be prepared beforehand.
And do you use rectangle lights sometimes?
I will say that those are the ones that we use the less. I don't know why, because but yeah, those are the ones that we use the less. Is mainly spot and point lights. But for example, if you have, those big square lights on the ceilings, or to fake some light coming from a window, that as long as the player is not going through the window and it cannot cross that light, you can use rectangular lights for those cases.
Sorry, just a last question for me. Do you use a color board or just rough, tiny rough to have in mind composition or color levels? And perhaps it's not produced by you, but do you have kind of color boards in your process?
Yes, usually this is defined with art direction. We have color boards, especially when we are working on the exteriors, and you have your sky should match these colors, and your light should match these others, and your shadows. But usually, either you have concepts and you will use those as reference, or you just have a color palette that you have agreed on with your art director, and you use those. It happens many times, especially in big productions, that you don't have any information or reference at all for your lighting on a scene, and then I just look for my own references and build my reference board and use the colors from that. Any other question? Okay, I think we are good. Thank you very much for your time.